Well, Nintendo Switch and 3DS emulation is officially dead after the Yuzu and Citra emulators were taken down by Nintendo after they successfully won a lawsuit, and the outcome of that lawsuit was the developers of the emulator shutting the emulator down, taking it offline, no longer working on it, and also $2.4 million being paid to Nintendo in damages. I never really understood Nintendo's position on emulation. Like on the surface level it makes sense because these are games that people are, let's face it, when you're emulating a game on GameCube or Wii or 3DS or DS or Game Boy Advance, you are not paying for it. Most of the people who are emulating are not paying for these games. Like, we're gonna have an honest conversation here. Most of the use case for emulation is, in fact, piracy. Piracy is theft, except it's important to talk about who you're actually stealing from, because you're not stealing from Nintendo. You're not taking profits away from Nintendo because they do not sell any of these games anymore, including the 3DS. The 3DS shop was just shut down months ago. So if I decided today that I wanted to play a whole bunch of 3DS games and get a 3DS, I would be paying money to collectors and people who are third-party sellers not affiliated with Nintendo. Sometimes it's a company like DK Oldies, and I don't know why they're the first one that I mentioned, but yeah, they're one of them. And you can also go on eBay, Amazon, individual sellers sell these retro games and they offer them to you, but you can spend thousands of dollars on these games online, these retro games, but Nintendo doesn't see a single dime of that transaction because they have no profit off of used games, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about used, pre-owned games, not games that Nintendo is even selling anymore. Obviously, Switch emulation is a completely different conversation because Nintendo does still support the Switch. Nintendo does still sell games for the Switch. But with the 3DS, it's like, come on. You discontinued it and gave people no alternative. So that's why I'm kind of like, okay, if Nintendo tomorrow launched a convenient, easy way to legally purchase all these games, and they take down the emulator, and they do all that, then I'd be like, okay, fine. Like, if they had what they had back during the Wii generation, where you had the virtual console, and it was so easy to get all these games, these classic retro games, they, for some reason, decide to get rid of that the next generation. Instead of building off the virtual console, they killed it and replaced it with something that isn't really comparable. The only thing they have is part of their Switch Online subscription service, where it includes a select number of retro games, NES games mostly. But it's like, is Nintendo really making money off of that specifically, or are most of the people who are subscribed to it so they can play games online and nothing else? It's pretty much paid online, consoles force you to do that, and that's pretty much it. So people are going to pay that no matter what. But that's what's so infuriating to me and a lot of other people, is that Nintendo is the most stringent in terms of protecting their intellectual property, in terms of taking legal action against these emulators and ROMs, yet they're also the worst company, by far, when it comes to game preservation. Like, it feels like a contradiction. I mean, the fact that Microsoft, for example, and I'm no fan or defender of Microsoft, if you guys are familiar with my content, but you gotta give credit where credit's due. They have done a lot for game preservation. They could do a lot more, of course, but as far as bringing the Xbox 360 backwards compatibility to newer platforms, so they have a legal way for you to purchase these games, but at the same time, they're not too concerned and they're not spending too much time taking action against the Xbox 360 emulator. Same thing with Sony. They don't worry nearly as much as Nintendo does about ROMs and emulators. And Sony's really not that great when it comes to preservation, but they still, like, if you look at the PS2 classic games that they sell, PS1 classics, the PS3, they don't offer any modern way for people to play those games, which is a shame because I feel like that's the best PlayStation generation. And the shutdown of the PS3 store seems imminent, as much as it got delayed a couple of years ago because of backlash, but I feel like very, very soon it's going to happen. But even Sony is still better than Nintendo. Yet Nintendo, of all the major companies, is taking the most action and is doing the most to shut down emulators, making it much harder for people to experience these games in modern times while offering no legal way for people to actually do so. I don't feel any joy or thrill in downloading these games illegally and not paying for them, but because the only other viable choice that I have is overpaying to these game collectors that are charging a shit ton of money and sometimes spending over $100 just for one game, I'm not going to do that. And it's also more convenient to play it on a PC than to dust up all these old machines and old consoles. So what choice am I left with? But Nintendo says, hey, the Nintendo Switch 2 has compatibility with all these generations of Nintendo consoles and portables, and we sell all the games for you to play on modern hardware with modern features. I would gladly pay for each and every one of those games. But Nintendo still offers no way for you to do that, and that's why I just don't feel any sympathy for them when people pirate their games, and I get rather angry when they do stuff like this, suing the makers of the emulators when they don't step up and preserve their own games. It's left for other people to do that for them, but when other people do that, they get the full wrath of Nintendo, and a lot of times they get their lives ruined. I mean, these lawsuit settlements with a lot of these people who make ROMs and emulators, their whole life is ruined and destroyed. There's no way they're ever going to be able to pay that money back. They're pretty much indentured servants for life to Nintendo. And while they legally have the right to do all this, it's morally fucked. But as long as people keep engaging with Nintendo consoles and Nintendo games, and they keep selling as much as they're selling right now, nothing's ever going to change. So keep complaining, but as long as you keep supporting them, you're part of the problem. And you have no reason to ever expect anything to change for the better. I'm doing my part. I haven't bought a Nintendo console since the Wii in 2008. So I'm standing up for my principles. Can you say the same for yourself? Because the reality is you can make YouTube videos, you can make angry tweets at Nintendo, but if you're still supporting them financially, that's all they care about. And that's all they ever will care about. Not about how happy or unhappy you are with their decisions. Actually do something about it. Vote with your goddamn wallet. Otherwise, respectfully, shut the fuck up. Because you're not actually doing anything meaningful to facilitate positive change. So as long as everyone keeps supporting them, I don't know how anyone expects anything to be different. The Switch is the second best-selling video game console of all time, and Nintendo is the most disgusting and evil company in the history of the video game industry. I think that says everything you need to know about the average video game consumer.